Well, hello and welcome to Bishop Talk. Thank you for joining us for our next series that we're beginning this month. As we enter into Pride Month, there's a lot of things that are happening around our state, our nation, and world, really, on Pride events that are coming up throughout the month of June. And this particular podcast for the month of June, we are focusing in on the topic of pride as a spiritual gift. And we could not think of any other person then to kick us off for this Pride Month podcast, then a friend that both Durrell and I have known for a very long time, professor. I sat at her feet we both sat at her feet as students. I think I TA'd for her one summer on a sexuality class, and when she was at the Episcopal Divinity School, and so we couldn't think of any way better than to start our Pride Month podcast off with none other than Dr. Carter Heyward. Carter has been a friend and ally and supporter for many, many years and so many different, I'm going to say iterations of her life because she has had several moments of just stepping up and stepping in at the right time on the feminist movement, the theological discourse that we've had over the years. And also on the LGBT front in so many different areas. Carter is author of many, many books. But I'm going to mention two briefly before she's ready to introduce herself. And one of the books that I recall you writing, Carter, was the Saving Jesus and rethinking what it
Right.
means to be Christian. And I think also your more recent one was the Seven Deadly Sins of White Nationalism. And both are topics that we're going to cover in probably some shape, form, or fashion today. But now I want to give it over to you to do your self-introduction and let you tell folks what you want them to know about you.
Okay, Robert. Well, let me just say first how honored I am to be with you two guys, two of the men whose ministries I most admire in our nation and our world today. And thank you for being who you are and doing what you are, both Bishop Robert Griffin and Bishop Durrell Watkins. Thank you. Well, here I am sitting in my home in the mountains of Western North Carolina, where, along with seven other women friends, we began to retire about 25 years ago, just bit by bit. We came here. We had bought enough land together that we could each have our own houses, either as individuals or couples. And we have made a small intentional community of this. It's not as tight as a commune, but it's a little tighter than simply a neighborhood, so that we know that we're here for each other. And five of the original eight of us are still here.
Mm.
Two of the original eight, including Beverly Harrison, whom you both knew, have passed on, but they're here in spirit. And we have younger people here now who are renting some of our houses, and we have quite a the only requirement for renting one of our 15 little cottages on the property is that people need to have some kind of a commitment to justice.
Mm.
That doesn't have to be the same at all. In fact, people have different ones. Most of the people here now are a generation younger than Sue and me and the others of my age. I'll be 80 in a couple of months, which is kind of amazing to me, but life does go on. And and the other thing people need to know is that most of us are lesbians who live here. And in the mountains of Western North Carolina, now that's not as unusual. There are lots of lesbians and gay men around here in Brevard, which is the closest town to us. Um, in no small part because it's a great center for artists, for musicians, for people who think outside the box, who live outside the box. And as you both know, this is often queer people. Uh,
Mhm.
at least it's not unusual for people to be queer and also really creative because we have to be. And that no more so than ever. And so, yeah, I retired from EDS basically in 2006. I had taken a half-time job 10 years earlier so that I could come down and begin to help set this up here. But I've been here really pretty much full-time since 2006. And while here, I have been primarily the involved in a therapeutic horseback riding center, which I helped found back in about 20 years ago, and then have been very involved with the NAACP.
Mm.
Um, and have been kind of vice president of the NAACP since its founding with the help of, uh, uh, gosh, just my age is showing here. Barber, how could I possibly forget the name of one of the saints and heroes of our time, Bishop William Barber, who was at the time president of the NAACP in North Carolina and has since gone on to sort of a larger screen, as we know. But he helped us get our little chapter started here, and we became very quickly pretty well known as a very pro-LGBTQ chapter of the NAACP, which of course Bishop Barber is very much a proponent of LGBTQ justice. That then set us at odds with some people who otherwise probably would have joined us, but you know how that goes. And so you just keep on keeping on doing the best you can. And Bishop Barber came several times to talk to pastors from the local community, and some he won over instantly, and some wouldn't come hear him. You know how that is. But that kind of sets the stage then for my ministry today, which is a combination of taking care of myself and helping take care of my friends, all of whom have some kind of physical and sometimes cognitive challenges these days, and doing what I can in the ongoing struggle against what Dorothea Zola called Christofascism.
Mm,
Mhm.
And I'll say more about that in a minute because I really do think that's where we are today.
mm.
Um, so that's I think that's enough of a beginning about me. I'm here with my friends, including my animal friends, and I love being where I am. And I hate what's happening in our country and our world, but um, we'll be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be okay.
Well, again, thank you so much for being with us today. And also, we have Bishop Durrell Watkins, as you many know, is the senior minister at Sunshine Cathedral. And also, we're both with the Global Justice Institute as well. So I'm going to let Durrell just kind of jump in and see where he wants to start us and what he wants to say.
Well, we've got questions in the queue if we want them, but don't wait for a question. If you've got stuff to say, just like you said, I'll talk about Christ the Passion. Well, just do. I mean, well, the questions are just a safety net. You just talk about everything you want to say. But I do want to, because you mentioned some health issues, this vibrant community, and yet
Mm,
individuals still have to take care of themselves because,
yeah.
aging and health and whatever. And then you're part of this therapeutic situation and this racial justice thing and queer theology and like all of these overlapping. It's a lot. It doesn't sound like retirement to me, but but can you talk about how that is ministry? How not just being singularly focused, how maybe one thing is what launches us, but we have to care about more than just one thing. And you put
Hmm.
that into practice. I remember, I forget which of the books, but like I think you in a prayer you talked about the elephant Christ or something. Like it was just so everything is so integrated in your teaching and your writing and your life. So can you talk about that a bit? About the
Yeah,
integration of
I
everything.
think that may be an even more important question than you realize, or that I realize often, is that I think something that is very queer, and I'm using that word very broadly right now because I think it's not just about sexuality, it's about a perspective on the world, which often comes from being LGBT uh, people.
Yeah.
Um, but it's that we have to think outside the boxes and make connections. I believe to be doing the work of the Spirit in today's world, really in any world, not just today, but because everything really is connected, and we can't see our sexual and gender struggles outside the struggles for civil rights for Black people and for immigrants and for other historically marginalized people in our nation. And as we see really throughout the world, as immigrants come from the South because of climate change and things that we've never before fairly recently connected. I mean,
Mhm.
who would have thought of climate change and environmental issues as being queer issues? But they
Mhm.
are really.
Yeah.
And so when people say, well, this is not my issue, I'm working for the environment, I usually try to say, well, actually, you may not realize it, but we are all connected, and that therefore we may not know much about other people's issues or and if we don't know much about, for example, climate issues, or don't know much about what's happening in Central America that would cause people to be migrating north, we still can accept, if we think about it, the fact that these struggles really are related, and that what goes on in our nation, where we as religious leaders are always called, I think, to pay attention to first, is generating courage and hope where fear is so formidable. I mean, the people that hate us the most are so afraid of us. They
Hmm.
don't know what it is they hate. They just hate what they think is for the reality of being uh, queer men and women or being trans people. We may experience these as sources of sacred power in our lives, which we do. I know you two might well enough, and I know myself well enough to say we understand this is for us is where God is.
Hmm.
Other people see the devil here, and so they think of people like us as Satan incarnate. We hear that a lot, I'm sure, always have for many decades. And all we can do is just say, well, use every public forum, every platform we have. And fortunately, the three of us have platforms. Even I in retirement have platforms because I can keep writing and speaking and coming on to programs like this and say, actually, here's where we find God. Here's where we find liberation. Here's what it means to love our neighbors. Here's what it means even to love our enemies. And let me just say here, because I was thinking about this, Durrell, in response to the questions you sent me about the cruelty and the chaos of these times. Lord knows it's enough.
Hmm.
I mean, the hate. I mean, I thought back in the 70s and 80s we were dealing with a lot of hate, and we were. But now it's so transparent. The difference being, as many people have said better than I, it's so public. I
Hmm.
mean, the Klan used to wear white robes so nobody would recognize them, and now they're right out there in the public square with their big flags flying around, and not saying that they're the Klan, but they're saying what the Klan says.
Right.
Hmm.
And so, if there is a Klan, that's what these people are today. And so, what can we do? Those of us who really hate that kind of injustice and that kind of hatred, how do we not hate the people who were
Hmm.
doing it?
I
And
struggle.
all I can say is we may feel hatred. I mean, we can't help our feelings. We may feel, and I can assure you, dear brothers, that I do from time to time absolutely hate some of the people that are the most famous among us today in this country that don't need to be named. Um, Although if we want to name them, we can. But my personal feelings are not what matters here. What matters is what I do with this.
Hmm.
And by the grace of God, we can overcome the hatred by simply not letting it direct our actions.
Mm.
And by deciding, because love is a decision, it's not just a feeling either. To decide to love is to make the decision that we're not going to let fear and hatred run our lives. We are going to do everything in our power to create right relation, mutual relation, even if it's not going to happen very well in our time. We can still struggle for it by not violating, not inciting violence against people that are inciting violence against us, by using the power of civil disobedience or at least nonviolent resistance to our enemies. Um, as forcefully and as publicly as we can. I think it really drives people crazy when we refuse to fight evil with evil. I really do. I think they can't figure out why are these people not showing more hatred against us. Um, so let me just back up a little bit and say, by love, love is not a soft, sweet feeling. Love is a moral commitment.
Mm.
Hmm.
And that's what I believe Jesus was talking about. That's what I believe God is always doing among us, is somehow getting our moral commitments rooted and
Mm.
grounded in our current life situations.
Mm.
Where I mean, there's nothing I have no personal love for Donald Trump. And I can't imagine, in quote, feeling love for Donald Trump. But to me, loving MAGA people and loving Trumpites is a matter of being honest about them and with them if ever I have an occasion to be, like Bishop Buddy did in the
Hmm.
National Cathedral.
Mhm.
That was a very loving act she did.
And
Very
courageous.
nonviolent, very honest, very straightforward, very courageous. Um, and she knew what she was dealing with. She's no fool
Yeah.
any more than you all are, any more than I am. So when you speak to someone like that, it's not going to be welcome.
Mhm.
But the whole world heard. And that's what's empowering. We all heard that,
Yeah.
which gives us, even though we may never have a chance to confront Mr. Trump personally, we certainly have chances day after day to confront people who may not know what to make of him, or may not know, or may be very, very confused about why what is happening is happening. We have chances to speak to people and to speak as honestly and as truthfully as we can, whether it's from the pulpit or whether it's in a conversation in a coffee house or in a one-to-one counseling situation, to be honest and to understand that that is loving, and that, as long as it's supported by a nonviolent, uh, I want the best for you and for myself and for all of us. That is love. And that is what you and I are called to practice and to help lead the way on in our time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So if
Wow.
I'm not being clear, please tell me to
No,
clarify.
no, he's being so clear. I'm writing like 7 or 8 things already that I want to follow up with. We don't have time for all of them, so I got to choose. But no, you're being super clear. That's
Uh,
great. I've never heard you speak about God outside the context of relationality.
mm,
Yeah.
Uh, and that's what I think is so different than more theistic ways of thinking and talking about
Yes.
God, because those are so dominant. Those are so power over
Mhm.
all the people who chastise us and hate us and say horrible and untrue things about us. It's always this dominant, authoritative God that somehow they know all about,
That's right. Always.
demanding it. And it's so different than the God you talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I came to that realization, which I must say has grown only stronger as I get older, that God really is our sacred power. When I say our, I mean every humans and perhaps every creatures. I don't, who knows what other creatures, how they experience us and the world, but that God is the power among us for generating mutuality, and by mutuality, it's not sameness, it's bringing out the best in one another, helping each other be who we're meant to be by a spirit of sacred justice love. And you may know that that term justice love actually originated in the Presbyterian Church's minority report in the 1990s, I think it was, when they were studying sexuality. And Marvin Ellison and
Mm,
Sylvia
mm,
Thorson Smith were co-chairing the minority report, which decided to use the terms justice and love as the same word,
mm,
hyphenated, because they said, and very rightly, I believe, that we can't have real love without justice, and we can't have real justice without love. So if we slice them apart, we may be missing something important. And so I often will just say justice, love, and then if people look puzzled, I'll try to explain what I mean. But um, that's what making mutuality is about, because whether it's mutuality between two countries or two spouses, it's that the relationships need to be just, right, mutually empowering for there really to be any lasting love
mm,
between the countries, or between the partners, and or between parents and children, or teachers and students. Um, and it's not really a very hard concept when you think about it. I mean, that obviously in a good marriage, both people are benefiting. And it really isn't about domination
mm,
any more than the divine human relationship is about domination, which is why the whole theistic image of God is so misleading. Yes, God is bigger than us, and yes, God is over and under. And one of the few hymns that I really don't take much issue with because of the language these days is the old St. Patrick's breastplate, which has an image of Christ being over us, with us, within us, outside us, around us, beneath our feet. And when Christ is envisioned that way, who cannot celebrate
yeah.
such a creative spirit? But when Christ is imaged as a Lord over us, that somehow speaks down to us as if we are not his sibling,
Hmm.
then there's something the matter, I believe, because that's not who Jesus was. Jesus was like us, and was one of us. And that's super important, I believe, for Christians to remember. And I'm sure it drives you all as crazy as it does me, maybe even crazier, since you're so immediately involved with the church as
mm,
an institution. What is being done today in the name of Christ, and what is being done just absolutely blasphemously against the Jesus story and the Jesus person,
Yes.
by the Christians who somehow believe that they have the answer to everything and that we are the problem
Mm.
and that we're really not Christians. I mean, not only because we're gay, but because we don't believe what they believe.
Right.
And our God is not what we don't see our God the same way they see theirs.
Yeah.
And we have a neighbor right down the street who's got a big, huge flag still flying in his front yard with Trump and Jesus together on the flag. I'm sure you've seen these flags. Big, giant size flag, still flying it in his front yard to this very day. And
Tackier version of a golden calf.
that's exactly what it is.
Mm.
And yet, that's exactly what it is. And I don't understand it. You know, I can't figure out. Yesterday, I was downtown we have a big festival on Memorial Day, and it's called the White Squirrel Festival because we have these beautiful white squirrels in our county. And I was working at the Democratic Party booth for a couple of hours, and right across from us is the Republican booth. And the Republican booth had big life-size cutouts of both Donald Trump and Elon Musk, if you can believe it, standing side by side, and people were having their pictures taken with these guys. And behind it was a big banner that says Trump for 2028. And happily, many people would look at that and they would come flying over to our tent on the other side of the road saying, Hammock, please give me a button. So I hope that one of the things that's going to happen is that these people are going to overreach, you know, and do themselves in, but we can't assume that's going to happen. So we've got to work as hard as we can to help our sisters and brothers and siblings understand where justice love really is in our world and why it does matter to us all.
Mm. I want to bring us to the local pulpit for just a second. I know there's a lot of clergy out there who are advocating for justice across the board, immigration issues, poverty issues, insecurity issues. And what would you say to folks in the pulpit right now, using their platform and addressing these issues? What it's not, I don't think there's one more issue that's important than the other issue because they're all important, from women's autonomy to voters' rights and everything.
Yeah,
Uh,
you
how
can't
would
really
you
rank them.
how would you challenge them right now to say, hey, these are important times, and we cannot shy back just because we're in a pulpit or we are clergy or we're even laity leading. What would you say to us now at this particular moment and leading and being prophetic
So,
witnesses?
right. The first thing I think I would do if I were preaching right now would be to talk about um, justice loves the inseparability for Jesus people, that somehow we can't really separate these commitments and that each is a commitment. Really, it's about what we're struggling for to do better. And none of us does anything perfectly, but we can love better, we can make justice better, or at least we can be committed to trying to do that. And that then I think what's extraordinarily important for pastors to hear as well as for people in the congregation to hear is there's never anything neutral about justice love.
Mhm.
I mean, as an Episcopal priest, I have become so weary of hearing pastors and priests say, well, we can't do this because we have to sort of show that we understand all sides or both sides, and we can't sort of take sides. Well, how ungospel-like is that? Of
Mm.
course we can take sides, and that doesn't necessarily mean naming names. Maybe it will. I'm not going to say that we should never name a name from the pulpit because we're living in very unusual times where we may have to, but we don't have to. If we're going to stand for justice, all we have to do is to talk about you're right, Robert, about 10 different issues for starters, and here they are, whether it is trans justice or whether it is immigrant justice or whether it's women's reproductive justice and rights or whether it is oh, elder care. I mean, there's so many things that are going under attack now as Medicaid becomes very vulnerable, we know
Mm.
through this House bill. I mean, what a blasphemous thing. I mean, if there's one thing the gospel is clear about, it seems to me, maybe more than any other issue, it's that we need to serve the poor. I mean, how can that be argued by Christians that somehow Christian churches can turn their backs on people who are poor among us? And it's not just about serving meals, which can be very important and can be, and probably always will be, a first order issue for churches, is to make sure that today people are not starving. But for us to be working for a world in which nobody is going hungry because there is way more than enough to go around, that's what we need to be doing as Christians. And how can there be any dispute about that? Um, I always say so that no, I think pastors can help their people understand that whoever you are sitting there in that pew, just remember that love is not neutral and justice is not neutral, and therefore please take a stand. And I'm not up here to tell you which stand you need to take because there's so many,
Mhm.
but pick an issue
Mhm.
and take a stand and be as public as you possibly can be and as outspoken as you possibly can be, whether that's just with your family or whether it's in the public square in some way, whether it's financially because you can afford it or whether it's because you actually can do something in the community that helps. But nobody should be neutral about injustice, and least of all the church. And
Uh,
I don't think that's controversial. I mean, people may say, oh, church shouldn't be political. Well, what, nonsense.
yeah, right.
Being political is not being partisan. Being political is taking account of power and how it's used and abused among us.
Yeah. Yeah, people will say, well, threaten, that you should have your tax exempt. Well, fine. I mean, okay, if we have to pay more taxes, like that's not reason enough to not to do what we do. And also, they are mistaken that churches don't pay taxes. We
That's right.
don't, first of all, we do. We there are certain breaks or whatever, but we do pay taxes,
Yep,
and we are a volunteer pool, and we do provide social services, which is why we get the tax break. If the government will take care of everything, fine, tax us equally.
that's
but
right.
but to make things depend on charity, whatever. So, but yeah, if you raise the taxes, okay, we'll cope. That's not a threat to us, but they seem to think it is.
That's right.
You've
One of
been,
the,
I'm
uh,
sorry.
no, I was going to say one more thing because with Pope Francis's death and now Leo's ascension, I was very interested in this exchange between J.D. Vance and Pope Francis, and kind of also indirectly through Pope Leo as well, about who is my neighbor.
Mhm.
And J.D. Vance talking about what he said was Thomas Aquinas's uh, ranking of love, that we're supposed to primarily love those who are our family closest to us and eventually maybe love the world. And both popes have said, no, no, that's not what Aquinas meant. And that is not what we mean. And that bringing it to us is not what we mean.
Mm,
We should, of course, be loving those who are close to us as well as we can. That is a given. And not that it always happens very well. And so, of course, we should be teaching and preaching that love of those closest to us. But it's not that that's more important than loving the man lying in the ditch, the Good Samaritan. It's that they're connected. I mean, that if we're loving people, we're obviously loving our families, but also the strangers. And
mm,
if anything, because it's often harder, loving the stranger, the one lying in the ditch, may be even more important today.
Mhm.
And I think so. Those popes made that very clear, much to the chagrin of many Americans, including J.D. Vance.
mhm,
But I think we can really make that very clear. I mean, our neighbor is often the stranger, the one that is the hardest to love because we're afraid of them, because somebody has made us afraid of them,
mhm.
Mhm.
Right.
not because they're really dangerous, but because somebody has told us they will rape us or steal from us or do something
Yeah.
terrible,
It
which
it
they
it is
won't.
it is amazing to me that an adjudicated rapist uses the threat of rape to make people fall in line. I
I
can't.
know. I know.
I'm stunned.
I
Or
am, well, I am too, Durrell, and I am, I'm like, I'm sure, I just go around when people talk about Trump and Vance and Elon Musk and that whole Stephen Miller and all the others. I mean, I shake my head to understand how people of goodwill can tolerate these people, leaving the policies aside. I mean, of course, the tax policies are outrageous and wrong, but we would have been saying that back in 1970 and 80.
Mhm.
But now, I mean, but back when it was Ronald Reagan and when it was George Bush, HW, and then George W. I mean, I really opposed most of their policies and found them to be I did not approve of what they were doing because of this very issue about the rich and poor
Mhm.
primarily. But these were not indecent human beings. And now we have got indecent, cruel, callous human beings leading our country, and that is unacceptable. I mean, there is nothing ever that excuses that kind of contempt, the mocking of the disabled people,
Mhm.
the hatred, the trivialization and hatred and contempt for women, that every woman who has any kind of power is a nasty woman.
Or
Um,
not very smart. He likes that. Not very smart.
not smart, and I mean, it just, the all I can say is that women the women that he attacks must appreciate the company they're in because, Nancy Pelosi right on down. I mean, Hillary Clinton, everybody, they're like, oh, well, whatever. Meryl Streep. I mean, it's like, what can you say about all these people?
Yeah.
And as you say, and Kamala Harris, God knows, as one of you has pointed out in something you wrote me, often it's women of color that are really bearing the brunt,
Mhm. Yeah.
um, which was, of course, part of the problem with Kamala
Mhm.
was she was black.
Mhm.
Black and female is a very bad mixture for today's GOP.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
And
you
go
have
ahead, Robert.
seen
Sorry.
you have seen lots of movements due to longevity, which I'm blessing and praying you're around for many more years. But you've seen a lot of different movements through different lenses over history. And one of the things that keeps baffling me is people talk about, well, how did we get here
Mm,
at this current political, the religious, all these things that's happening right now? And there's some who say, well, if we had never elected President Obama, this wouldn't have happened.
mm,
If we never had done this, taken this action, this wouldn't have happened. But what frightens me most is that this was almost skin surface deep that got unleashed on
mhm.
America,
Yeah, I
and
think
it's
that's
having a global impact. And that's what scares me. It's how close to the surface this all was. And so I get, if you were to look in your crystal ball and say, I'm asking, how did we get here? How did we get here? I'm very confident we're going to overcome. We're going to get through it. But how on
yeah.
earth did we get here?
Well, I think that's a wonderful question, and it leads us into the future, Robert, because um, you know how many sort of mainstream good conservative people among our friends who would be normally in normal times they'd be Republicans
Mhm.
because of Republican policy. Um, they often will lift up Ronald Reagan as their hero. And that's a challenging thing for me because I think to me, one of the big problems began with the election of Ronald Reagan and the defeat of Jimmy Carter, because Reagan made a pitch for the rich and was really the first U.S. president to come along and start talking about welfare queens, and was willing to even throw his buddy Rock Hudson under the bus
Mhm.
as a gay guy, and turned his back on men, primarily men, later just people in general with AIDS. I mean, Reagan might have been a lovely human being in many ways, but he was, in my mind, a very uh, compromised and challenging president if you really love Justice Love. Because it was in 1981 that the gap between the rich and the poor in this nation began to widen to where it is today, where it's ridiculous, where the top, I don't know the statistics right now, but they're really outrageous in terms of what the rich have and what the poor have. And here we have this new tax bill
Mhm.
that will give the rich even more to make them even richer and the poor even poorer. And so that's one place we can uh, locate the beginnings or the continuation of a movement toward where we are now,
Mhm.
is as the rich begin to feel empowered and entitled. I talk about this some in my book, The Seven Deadly Sins of White Christian Nationalism. And then from that point on, the Republican Party became a party that looked for scapegoats.
Mhm.
And when it could no longer use and this is actually pre-Reagan. This is right before Reagan, was maybe why Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter. In fact, it's because the Republicans had already begun to use the civil rights legislation of the 1960s to scare people. We know that that's when private schools and homeschooling became rose up
Mm,
as huge alternatives to public schools because public schools were going to be integrated
right.
once civil rights legislation. And that was 1954, but by 1964 and 65, racial integration was on the front burner in this country. And this was not acceptable in a white supremacist society. I mean, rich white people did not want their sweet little kids to be always around little black kids and little brown kids. This was not okay. And most of us who were there at that time just didn't know how deep. I mean, I'm a Southerner, a white Southerner whose family fought on for the losing side in the Civil War. And I didn't realize how much that struggle still lived on, even among my own family. My extended, my immediate family is fine, but although God knows we probably wouldn't be where we are right now without the white privilege that had been that came to us, simply because we're white.
Mhm.
But I didn't realize how deep the lost cause that sense went in the South. And I was so shocked when Confederate flags began flying again.
Mm,
And and I still am. It's like, what? Who are these people? Well, they're my ancestors.
mm,
That's who they are. And I have to recognize that. And that is our collective sin. So when people say, but I'm not racist, I want to say, wait a minute. I'd like to say I'm not racist too as an individual, but I come from a slave-owning family in the South. I have benefited enormously from white privilege. I have not benefited from gender privilege, but that's part of the mix of who I am. And we probably, all of us, all three of us probably can go through it in some complicated ways and talk about privilege and lack of privilege. Um, but that's part of where we come from, is having these very complicated histories. And it's that fear of otherness, fear of white people's fear of losing economic power that Reagan played into, that formerly white people who had enslaved people in the 19th century had played into in the 19th century, that was born again in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, and that Trump has just stirred yet again.
mm,
And I think that's where the election of Obama shook people up, a lot of people. I mean, not that it was all that odd that a very talented and charismatic Black man had been elected to the US presidency. For most of us, that was a cause for great celebration. White people, Black people, brown people, Asian people, queer people, everybody. Most of us thought that was wonderful. But I think it scared the bejeebies out of people who thought, oh my God, what's going to happen next?
Mhm.
Will this happen again? What will happen? And it's about profit and money. And it's about white, predominantly Christian people, either at least by name. I don't know how Christian these people are, but people who call themselves Christians, who love money, in my judgment, often love money way more than they love what we think of as God. Uh, who uh, who want more, always more, and for whom racial justice, gender justice, sexual justice, and certainly economic justice and environmental justice cannot be accepted. And so it's been building and we have one party right now that has made this elimination of justice fashionable. And
Yes.
that's what we have to fight to get back. And the Democrats have got to fight harder than they're fighting. I love the Democrats. I don't blame them for what has happened. I don't blame them for the defeat of Kamala Harris. Um, and I don't blame Kamala Harris for sure. But
Mm.
we've got to be more outspoken. We who are Democrats, we can't be shy about supporting trans people, about supporting Black people, about supporting abortion rights for women. We've just got to find ways of connecting that to where people actually live. And I hope that the overreach of MAGA is going to help us.
Yes. We've always seen the corporations, which are now people apparently, we've always seen corporations be just monstrous, and we've seen fundamentalist churches be monstrous. We've seen individuals just be monstrous. But in spite of all that, year by year, legislatively or judiciously, things got a little bit better. There was
Mm.
Roe v. Wade, there was marriage equality, uh, there were the sodomy laws were struck down, and so one by one, little things. But what has happened in the Trump era, I guess for the first time, these attitudes aren't new, but it's the first time that progress is being reversed, and
Yeah.
and the bad things are actually being codified.
Yeah, but you know what, Durrell? I think what we have here, and I hope that I believe, not only do I hope, but I believe, which is part of hope, that again, overreach is going to be on our side because I think that most Americans do not agree with MAGA and with Trump about any of this. I think most Americans are on the side of queer justice, and I think most Americans are on the side of women's reproductive freedom and choices and on behalf of racial justice. And I mean, so I think that most Americans, but those who are not, have been given the green light to make it loud and proud that they're standing for real Americans, which are white people and Christians and straight people and rich people whose wealth will trickle down to the poor. I mean, I think that's what they are in ascendance right now.
Mm,
And but they are not the majority. And what I think we as the majority have got to figure out is how to message who we are. And this is where churches can be helpful if we will speak out and can find ways of empowering our people to speak out that we really are not only uh, on the side of what is just and loving, but we are in the majority.
mm,
And we are pledged to nonviolent resistance of injustice and evil, and we will not repay evil with evil. We're not going to slay our enemy once we win, which I hope we will within the next 4 to 6 years. We will try to repay evil with love, which will mean something like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which requires truth and requires speaking the truth on all sides, and then trying to build community from there with those who believe in truth. I think we can do it, but when I say we, I mean we religious leaders, not just Christians, but certainly including Christians and people, guys like you and gals like me and our siblings. Boy, it's our moment in a way because things have never been more challenging, but I also believe hopeful.
mm.
Robert is the timekeeper, and I know that the time is cooked, but I've got at least two more questions. I bet he has one or two. So, Robert, if we're bumping up against the ceiling, give me some kind of signal because I'm gonna still keep firing questions until you give me the nod or the wink or something to
Uh,
stop.
we're pushing for that, but let's get at least 5 more minutes worth in, then we'll call it.
Okay. All right. Well, I had a personal question that if we only have 5 minutes, maybe we don't take time with. I just wanted to know because we all have shared ministry with spouses, partners, lovers, uh, and how unique a challenge that is, but also how fabulous. I can't even imagine doing this anymore any other way. I mean, Robert and I are almost indistinguishable in people's minds. We do everything. We work together hand in glove. And and you're one of the few people that we can share that with because with world famous theologians and ethicists that you've built families with, and it's just an amazing thing. Um, and you can say something to that if you want to, but my big question is because we're talking about pride as a spiritual gift, like this working for justice and believing in ourselves and celebrating ourselves, that is actually a form of worship for us, and it's a healing thing for us. It's something we offer the world. And I just don't think we can talk about pride as a spiritual gift without speaking specifically about what's happening to transgender and gender expansive and non-binary people. Can you
I, I,
tackle it?
I completely agree. And I mean, I'd go so far as to say that the image of trans to me is a sacred image. I mean, I think because transcendent means crossing over from one to another. And if a person is trans, there is a kind of crossing over that is happening that if we view it through sacred eyes, I mean, through, as I believe, sort of through the eyes of God, as close as we could ever get to that, we see a kind of movement that can be very transcendent,
Mm,
where neither God nor humanity is being sort of boxed in. Now, I think obviously we humans, not just trans advocates, uh, I talk with people, very progressive people about this a lot, as I'm sure you do even more, which is about, well, what about trans men playing in women's sports and whatever? I see that as a distraction. I mean,
Mm,
I think that that is such a particular situation that can be regulated and moderated from situation to situation, and maybe can use some help. I don't know where justice can prevail. But basically, trans people are among the most oppressed people in our society right now, and therefore Christians have a moral obligation to be in solidarity with trans people and to help and to empower trans people to help us, those of us who do not identify as trans, see and understand their reality and figure out how to be public advocates. Um, Certainly, the Democrats have not figured this out very well, because we collectively let ourselves get on the defensive and get hooked into this trans sports thing, which I think is not going to help anybody. That's not the argument to begin with. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
You know, it's like picking out the most frightening thing imaginable or the most sort of inconsequential and making it become the icon of fear.
Right.
Um, I will say personally, and I've said this a little bit in writing recently, that if I had been born 10 or 15 years ago, I myself could easily be non-binary.
mm,
I don't know whether, I don't think I would have been actually trans because I'm happy enough and feel enough myself in femaleness, but really it's never been femininity. It's always been much more kind of uh, fuzzy for me, my own sense of who I am in terms of gender. So
Hmm.
I think this sort of the non-binary uh, identity is a great thing, and I really am pretty much that, even though I'm a woman,
Yeah,
mm,
in real life. So, but I mean, I think that it's all part of one big whole of how any of us identifies ourselves gender-wise in this world of ours, and there again, I think we who are, and particularly MCC and other radically gender affirming churches like the Unitarian
hmm,
and really the Episcopal Church in most ways, need to try to help people again get through their fear and understand the real uh, sort of awakening possibilities in this for all of us, not just for people who identify as trans. I think it's a sacred call,
yeah.
not only to be that, but to speak of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I believe that. I try not to privilege Christian traditional images of God, names for God, even in scriptural. And yet, if we just limited the conversation just to our traditions, we still have Adonai and Elohim and El Shaddai and Yahweh and El, and we have all kinds of names and naming and experiences and gender realities and the God who nurses us
Yeah.
and so many different things. I think the only time I can think of God's genitalia being specifically mentioned is in Job, where it's God's womb that produces the ice storms. Um, it's so uh,
Yes.
so it seems like even from our own tradition, just being faithful to what we have. Yes, of course, it's mostly male and patriarchal, blah, blah, blah. But even in that, that there's all of this trans affirming, I would think,
Yeah.
or certainly God is non-binary, you know.
Right.
So
God is non-binary, and that really is trans, is it not? I mean, that's because it's moving from male to female, female to male, both and neither or. I mean, God is also in the trees, and
mm,
it is
God's
a
way
choice
beyond
to ignore
gender
that.
as well.
It is a
Yeah,
choice to ignore that.
it is. It is. So, but I have to say before we leave that I can't think of any Christian organization, really any organization, period, that has more of a potent ministry than yours because of where we are in this moment in our collective history. It's like, whoa, um, whiteness is so much in ascendance, and straightness is so much in ascendance, and all of it such nonsense, but it's also really harsh and really violent. So we have a very special call.
mm,
Yes.
mm. Well, I want to thank you for being with us today, Carter. This has been a time well spent for us, and I know when our viewers watch this, that's going to be a blessing to them as well. And I look forward to just being in more community with you as we continue to move forward on this journey and in this struggle. And I'm going to let you have the final word. If you have any final word or blessing that you want to pass on to us, any wisdom, thoughts, or just looking down the road and saying, "Here we are, folks. This is what I know."
Well, again, I appreciate this opportunity. And as always, I kind of just start talking and keep going. But I do think that one of our primary calls as religious leaders today, and I don't mean just those of us who are ordained, who are bishops and priests, but is to help people keep hope.
Mm,
Because so many people are despairing, and understandably so. But we need to bring hope into play every possible way we can. And uh, back in the early 1980s, I was at a protest on behalf of the people of Nicaragua in the Boston Common,
mm,
and a Quaker woman was speaking. You all might have even been around, but a Quaker woman was speaking to us, and she said, when people's hope and energy begins to flag, remember two things. Number one, do something. Don't just sit there, do something, you know. And number two, do it together.
mm,
Don't let ourselves get isolated.
mm,
What you were saying, Durrell, about partnership, having a spouse, you and Robert, me and Sue, me and Beverly Harrison in earlier years. I mean, such incredible energy there, but also beyond coupling, just our communities,
mm,
to lean into them and then to learn together, because often it's only together that we can discern the next right thing. That we can't just sit around and think about it. And if people can't, when use the term about don't just sit there, I didn't mean that as an able-bodied prejudice, but even if all we can do is sit here, we can do something. We
right.
can speak. We can, if we are lucky, we can write, we can reach out, we can empower other people, and we can let ourselves be hopeful because together we will get through this. And that is a spiritual promise. Things are always first for us, which spiritual realities, and then we figure out the politics. But because we are people of a spirit of hope and of justice, love, we know that somehow we're going to get through this. And if not we individually, then our communities.
Mm.
What Moses knew, what Jesus knew. We don't even have to make it individually, but we have to keep on keeping on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you everyone for viewing with us today. You can find this topic and more topics at sunshinecathedral.org and also at the Sunshine Cathedral YouTube site as well. Thank you. God bless each one of you, and
Thank
thank you
you.
again, Carter,
God
for being
bless
with
you.
us. Take care.
Bye bye.